When I'm cutting up a felled tree for firewood, I usually do it in two steps. The first step is I use a machete and I take off all of the smaller branches. I kind of decide which are going to be pieces of firewood and which are going to be scrap by whether or not I can take it off with a machete. I'm a little bit surprised how few videos there are on YouTube that really show how to use a machete as a tool. I mean, there's ones on how to fight with it. There's all sorts of ones about which is better than another. I like this one because it's right for the job I do. If I was working in a confined situation, then a shorter machete would be better. If I was really using it to chop heavy stuff, a heavier, broad machete would be better. But this one has a nice long swing, and I keep this part of it sharp occasionally. The most important rule about how to cut with a machete is always make sure that where you're cutting there's resistance. If you're trying to cut a branch like this, you don't go down through it like that. You want to go through it diagonally, because the longitudinal resistance will help hold it in place, and then all you got to worry about is that it's trying to move down. To help hold it in place, you should grab hold of it and just before you strike, really tighten your grip to hold it there. Of course, if you can do it rather than cutting where the branch isn't supported, you want to do it where it is, like this point here. If you're going through something thicker, you may have to do multiple cuts, so you try to take a V. One slash that way, one slash that way, and that should take out a chip. And then you have much narrower wood to go through, and you can get through it easily. There are several ways to swing a machete, and it makes a difference what you're trying to do. If you're trying to cut through a branch like this, for instance, the best way is to trail your arm or trail the machete through so that as contact is made, it's slicing. When you're going through something real thick, then you can extend your wrist down so that you're actually chopping. But in this case, to get through something like this, we want our arm to lead and the machete to trail, like that. So you get a nice clean slicing of it rather than a chopping. Another trick that can be quite useful when you have the opportunity is to predispose the branch to cutting. And what you can do is you push down on the branch or whatever to bend it, and that way the top of what you're going for will already be in tension and it will cut easier. Now, I'm probably not going to get through this on one swing, but I should get deeper than I would otherwise. And that's about a 2-inch branch right there. If you have a choice between going this way and going this way is usually better, because the blade will tend to travel to end up parallel to the grain. The cut here will just kind of drive you down into the heart of the thing, but a cut out here has a better chance of going through. Now, if you want to take something that's nice and thick like this, you're going to have to do multiple swings, and the key is to try to remove wood. So we do one chop this way and another chop that way to get a chunk out of it. And I'm choosing this point here because when I start with a chainsaw, I'll have one piece of firewood and another piece of firewood. So this is where I want to go. A lot of these smaller ones just come in right next to the trunk. And you can see it's fairly easy to do the small ones with a machete. Here's one other tip that I find useful on my trail work when I want to cut off some of the epicormic growth coming out of a trunk, but I don't want to damage the main tree. I just want to get the smaller limbs off that are blocking the path. And the trick is to tilt your blade a little bit out from the piece you're trying to cut off of and slide down it. That way you can make sure you're hitting in about the right place without doing any damage to the stuff you want to keep alive. You just are grazing off of it and you're not doing any damage to it. Another cut that can be useful is one that you may not get to use very often in work like this, but if you're doing trail work it can come in quite handy. And that is to take a branch that you can't conveniently reach the base of where it ties into the major branch, and just take it and simply bend it, push it down against a firm object such as another major branch or the trunk of a tree, and that makes it easy because it's well backed and you can cut right through it. A couple of things about safety. I don't have a lanyard on this. I think they're generally a good idea because I've probably twice a year managed to swing, and either because things have gotten wet or because I've grown tired, I've ended up slinging the machete 15 feet or so, and you don't want to be around other people when that happens. If you've got a lanyard around your wrist to keep that thing from flying, that's a good idea. Another thing is, given a choice, you should try to do your cutting on the opposite side of the main branch. In other words, here, if I cut like that, I've got a chance of it hitting into my leg. If I'm on the other side of the branch, then there's no risk of that. There you see I did hit my leg, but I've got the heavy boots on, so it didn't cause any injury. That's the preferred way of going after a branch like that. And there you see the problem: when you're going that way, you stand a chance of ending up down in the main part of the branch. Some of you may have noticed this notch in the top of my machete. That was one that I put there. I cut it out deliberately because I'm getting old, I don't like to bend over, and so very frequently I use it to pick up some of the branches that I've cut. Just makes a convenient little handle to help with the transport. So that's useful so you don't have to bend over. You may also have noticed the gloves I'm wearing. These are lined leather work gloves. They're really for winter work, but when you're using machete, you tend to get a lot of hard vibration, and having the leather plus the lining on the inside makes it a lot easier in your hands because you don't get that same vibration. The gloves normally would help you just simply with the prevention of blisters, but with the extra lining on it, it cuts down on the vibration problem. Another key consideration in reducing vibrations is where you hit with the machete. If you hit out near the end here, this mass is going to try to continue moving down, and only your hand here will stop it. And so as this flexes down momentarily, it'll send a pulse into your hand, and that will be on the bruising side. If you hit in here, then this mass out here, which has a higher momentum because it's got thicker, it's got more velocity, so a hit here, that's going to try to move the machete in your hand upwards, and that's going to jar your hand. This area here, which you see is just about worn clean, is where I like to hit because it's balanced between the momentum of this and the momentum of this, so all of the shock is really driven into there, and I don't get much vibration here. So it's important to hit well back from the end so that this is really just functioning as a mass, and this is what's doing your cutting. If you cut up in here, that's not good at all. So really the part you got to keep sharp is this area right here. The machete is primarily for use on green woods, stuff that hasn't dried out and hardened. If you need to be working with dried dead woods, then a saw will be a better choice. You can still take it with a machete, but a saw would be better for you. Now there are some machetes on the market that have saws on the back of them, but I would advise you against buying one of those. They may look neat, but if you're going to be someplace where a saw is available, then don't buy a machete with a saw blade on the back of it. It should be solely for those cases where you need a machete and a saw and you can't have both. This is a machete that has a saw on the back of it, and as you can see, it has snapped. What happens is these little indentations that are made for the teeth allow a stress concentration to develop at the bottom of the groove. And in this case, when I took it and chopped down into something, the blade followed the grain and twisted, and that caused the end to flex down, and it caused it to get a high concentration of stress right at the bottom of the groove, and it snapped through. So I'd actually strongly advise you against buying machetes that have teeth on the back of them. I've removed everything I can conveniently reach with a machete, so tomorrow we'll start a video on chainsaw and tips for rendering a tree with a chainsaw. There's certainly a lot of videos of chainsaw use. This one will just have a few of the simple tips that sometimes don't get put on other videos. Thank you, and I hope you found this informative, or at the very least, amusing.